beyond shocked by revelations about what happened in Irish institutions in the past. Tonight on Prime Time, we open a whole new chapter in this sorry tale. For the first time, we uncover evidence of previously undocumented medical research conducted on children in care in this state. Those children, former residents of those homes, continue to battle to this day for access to their own records. And most shockingly of all, we reveal for the first time how hundreds of children were used for medical science, even in death. Katie Hannon has this investigation.
This day trip to Brighton is a rare treat laid on by a London Irish support group for this group of survivors of Irish institutions. Many of these women were born in mother and baby homes, where their unmarried mothers fled to in great secrecy to have babies they could not keep. Tonight, Primetime tells their stories.
Those women had no power. My mother, all the mothers in there, all the women in there, they had no power.
Their powerlessness left their babies uniquely vulnerable. Tonight we reveal new evidence of the scale of medical research conducted on children in these homes.
We were there for them to do whatever they wanted to us. You know, we were the lowest of the lowest. You know, and we were reminded of that so many times.
In Philadelphia, we found more Irish abroad who were born in these homes. Adopted to the United States as babies, they have had to battle to uncover their past. Even in middle age, they still can't get their medical files.
I've tried everywhere to get my file, and everyone I know, but I can't get my information. I can't get a file.
In investigating this scandal, we uncovered a truly shocking new chapter. The fact that the bodies of hundreds of infants who died in our institutions were sent for dissection to Irish medical colleges up until the 1960s.
I guess it further defines just how little we were thought of at that time in history, and that we were just less than real people.
Their story begins at a time of major advances in vaccination programs. An end to infectious diseases became the holy grail of public health policy. A vaccine for polio had been developed in the 1950s, and from 1960 the spread of diphtheria, tetanus and whooping cough was effectively halted. But medical advances demanded pools of children for clinical trials. In the US, Australia and the UK, scientists sowed the seeds for future scandals by conducting much of their research in children's institutions. In Ireland, many of the vaccine trials were conducted in homes for single mothers. After independence, it was government policy to provide mother and baby homes for fallen women. These would be seen as places of refuge by some, and as places of detention by others, where the sin of childbirth outside marriage would have to be purged. Run by nuns and funded by the state, the largest of these homes in Cork, Tipperary, Westmeath and Dublin catered for hundreds of women and their babies. Now middle-aged, these women find support in their shared origins. Much of their history remains a mystery because of the secrecy of their births. Many of their mothers were grateful to the nuns, but the picture that emerges is of a harsh regime.
If a feisty mum came in who was pregnant, you know, the punishments they would get, and you know, you'd hear the nuns say, "I'll teach you a lesson," and they had beautiful hair, just shave all the hair off, and you know, just break them, you know, that they would come out broken women.
The archives relating to these homes remain closed, but it's clear they provided an ideal environment for clinical trials, with large pools of babies who could be easily monitored, whose mothers felt powerless to intervene. Vaccine trials in children's homes without consent would not be allowed under the Nuremberg Code, a set of guidelines agreed following the trial of Nazi doctors after World War II. Yet these guidelines were blatantly ignored in the rush for medical advances in the post-war period.
In the mid-20th century, it was much easier for researchers to do research on captive populations where you've got all the subjects you might want for a study all there in one place.
Back in Ireland, the vaccine research was led by the late Professor Patrick Meenan, a distinguished microbiologist at University College Dublin, who was also a government advisor. He was assisted by his colleague, the eminent Professor Irene Hillary, who would succeed him as head of the medical faculty in UCD. As their published research shows, they worked with one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. Wellcome wanted to produce better, cheaper vaccines with fewer side effects. The multinational company Burroughs Wellcome wanted to test modified versions of its own vaccines. Commissioned to conduct a number of vaccine trials, the UCD researchers needed large groups of children who could easily be monitored. They found them in mother and baby homes and in children's residential institutions. As Professor Meenan put it at the time, in those days there was almost a tradition of doing testing in orphanages. You went to where the material was, to put it crudely. That material included Mary Steed. Here she is meeting her adoptive parents for the first time as she arrived in the United States in 1963. She had spent the first 3 years of her life in the care of her mother Josephine in the Bessborough Mother and Baby Home run by the Sisters of the Sacred Heart in County Cork. Mary had long suspected that she was the subject of the 1960 vaccine trial.
So the more I read about the vaccine trials and how they were given, that they were experimenting with 4-in-1 combinations and 3-in-1 combinations, it kind of clicked and made sense.
Her medical records show that she had 3 4-in-1 injections as well as a booster shot for polio given by Dr. Hillary. However, it was only last week, years after her search for information began, that Mary learned the truth. GlaxoSmithKline, the multinational pharmaceutical giant and successor company to Burroughs Wellcome, confirmed that she was indeed a trial subject. Even after years of suspecting as much, the confirmation that she had effectively been used as a guinea pig as a child has had an impact.
The most frightening thought to me is that anyone, any scientist, any medical body would deem it appropriate to use children that you don't have any medical background for, you haven't asked for their mother's permission, you've simply gone into a home full of vulnerable children who are basically, I don't like to use the term society's cast-offs, but in a way that's what we were. And to not seek our mother's permission and it just to me seems like bad science.
Until now, only 3 trials have been officially acknowledged. They involved almost 200 children in children's institutions and mother and baby homes in 1960, 1970 and 1973. Just over 100 children in the community were also recruited for the later trials. But while consent was obtained from the parents of those children, there is no record of consent being sought or obtained from the mothers in the mother and baby homes. In the late 1990s, a government report on those vaccine trials highlighted this absence of consent. It was the key question that concerned the then Health Minister.
It was clear from the report that there was no parental consent, there was no real consent either sought or given for these trials to take place.
On the advice of the Attorney General, the Minister asked the Laffoy Commission on Child Abuse to investigate.
We were referring it to Laffoy because we were saying there's a case here where, unless otherwise proven, that there was a violation of the integrity, the physical integrity of the children concerned, which the AG would have indicated to us would have amounted to, which would have come within the terms of that act in terms of abuse to children.
But the decision to investigate further was strongly resisted within the department.
You know, what will this do to the reputations of the academics concerned? There seemed to be some concern about that articulated. And the second point was, you know, what more will be found?
At University College Dublin in the 1960s and 70s, those academics were at the very height of their profession. Both of them successfully challenged the Laffoy Commission. The High Court found that the vaccine trials couldn't legally be defined as child abuse. The vaccines inquiry was shut down in 2006. Behind these windows, thousands of documents relating to the trials remain in storage and out of reach. Among the stacks of boxes is evidence of other vaccine trials. We know this because the Commission's interim report stated that the documentation discovered by GlaxoSmithKline also disclosed a considerable amount of information in relation to other vaccine trials conducted in the state. We asked GlaxoSmithKline about this, and for the first time, the company publicly revealed that there had been a fourth trial. It was conducted in 1964 on babies in the Shanross Mother and Baby Home in County Tipperary. This previously unknown trial involved giving different doses of measles vaccine to 12 babies, aged between 9 and 19 months. Those babies would now be aged 49. It's unlikely that any of them know that they were once the subject of a clinical trial. GlaxoSmithKline told Primetime that this is the only other clinical trial sponsored by Boroughs Wellcome using children in institutions in Ireland. But if that is indeed the case, who then was responsible for the trial of a 5-in-1 vaccine carried out in another mother and baby home in 1965? It has never been publicly acknowledged, but Philip Delaney has always known that he was part of a trial which involved giving a 5-in-1 vaccination to 20 babies in the 1960s. His birth mother, Margaret Finnegan, was a young Irish woman working in Wales when she fell pregnant in 1965. She was relieved to be offered refuge in the Bessborough home in Cork with just weeks to go before the birth of her son. She knew she would have to give him up for adoption.
My biggest fear would be my father finding out, because he could be very strict, and I don't know what he did. He could have, somebody told me after, they could actually sign you away for life, and I don't know if that's true or not, but I was told that then.
When Philip's adoptive mother Vera collected her little boy, she was told that they had started giving him his vaccinations, but that the doctor would visit their home to finish them off. When that doctor arrived, she began by taking a blood sample, explaining to Vera that Philip was actually the subject of a trial.
She said that he should never been sent out for adoption, that him and 19 other, there's 20 babies, him and 19 other babies had been allocated for this trial injection. And for some unknown reason, they were suddenly sent out for adoption. They were gone all over the country. Said we have to travel all over the place, Dr. for them. And that was when I realised that there was something wasn't just right there.
Philip is unusual in that he has managed to get his medical records. They clearly show that he received 3 doses of a 5-in-1 jab, an unheard of combination. Underneath this information, the words "Contact Dr. Hilary, Dublin" have been crossed out. Despite his mother's clear recollection, and despite what his medical records confirm, Philip has been officially told that there is no evidence to suggest that he was ever a participant in a vaccine trial.
The government's saying there are no ill effects. How do they know? Because they don't know about this trial. They have not looked into the results of this trial. We don't even know which other babies were involved in this trial. So until that information is made public, we don't know whether there were ill effects or not. If there weren't, fine, but let's just get the information out there and find out.
Philip Delaney's case confirms what many former residents of these institutions fear, that there were other trials conducted on them that no one has yet acknowledged. The Ministers for Health and for Children told Primetime today that they would guarantee their department's cooperation with any Oireachtas inquiry into these matters. With so much research activity in homes that were largely funded by the taxpayer, just what was the state's role in all of this? Primetime has learned of a trial of TB tests in a Dublin industrial school in 1945, which was organised and run by the County Council with ministerial approval. Documents also show that the state knew about the 1973 Trivax trials in Dublin orphanages. The use of children in residential institutions for clinical trials was controversial in official circles at the time. Indeed, unease about the practice went all the way up to the Minister for Health, whom we know banned at least one such trial from taking place in the early 60s. An internal Department of Health memo refers to a request by the UCD researcher Professor Meenan to carry out a trial of an oral vaccine in St. Patrick's Mother and Baby Home on the Navan Road in 1962. The Minister decided that the selection of the group to participate was open to objection, and approval was not given to the proposal. Could this indicate that requesting official permission for trials was routine procedure? All we know for sure is that the trials continued. Professor Meenan passed away in 2008. He has defended the trials in the media in the past. Professor Hillary declined to take part in this programme, saying she is now elderly. Over the years, she has vigorously defended her role. Responding to the government report on the trials in 2000, she insisted that it was her invariable practice to obtain consent of the competent authority, be it the mother, the manager or the medical officer. But no record of written consent exists. Indeed, the religious orders who ran the biggest mother and baby homes deny that they gave consent. The Sisters of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary said they were unaware that any permission was sought by medical staff from any member of the congregation for the carrying out of the trials. The Daughters of Charity, who ran St. Patrick's Home on the Navan Road, also rejected any involvement of its sisters, saying it is just not feasible that they could have approved clinical trials. Certainly, Philip Delaney's mother Margaret says she was not asked for her permission.
I didn't give my consent for Philip to be have these injections. No, I didn't.
You're sure about that?
I am.
Now living in England, Mary Steed's mother Josephine was similarly adamant that she was kept out of the loop.
How are you? Oh, it's lovely to see you.
My mother absolutely said they never asked her for consent. She said the only thing they ever did was come to us and say, we're taking your child for their jabs, and that was it. They weren't in the room, they weren't holding us, no permission was ever asked for, she didn't know what we were getting. So absolutely, she is very clear on that.
GlaxoSmithKline told Primetime that the Wellcome Foundation conducted its studies fully in accordance with medical and ethical standards of the time. Despite the Nuremberg Code, the medical establishment in Ireland was no different to medical researchers all over the developed world during this period. They believed that they were conducting research that would ultimately benefit children. Consent was not a consideration, at least not in relation to some of their subjects.
In the 1940s and 1950s, people hadn't learnt the lesson of the Nuremberg trial and the Nuremberg Code, and were just carrying on doing research as easily and conveniently as they could without actually worrying about whether consent was obtained or not.
For many former residents of these homes, it's the not knowing that rankles. Denying them access to their full records has raised suspicions. Like Mary Steed, Chris Kerwin was also born in Bessborough in 1960.
As a teenager, I became aware of these marks, scars on my arms, and I asked my adopted mother, or my mother I should say, what they were and why had I got them, and she just said that when I was a baby, when she adopted me, they were there.
Born in mother and baby homes were exported to the United States, where they were adopted by childless American couples. Now adults, many of these people are questioning whether they too could have been part of these clinical trials.
I'm from Bessborough. I was born in Bessborough, Cork in 1960. I came here as a 2-year-old in 1962.
Maureen was in Bessborough when the 1960 vaccine trial was carried out.
I have a lot of marks on my body that I can't identify. I mean, like, why would I have so many?
Joe Farrell was born in Castlepollard in 1960 and adopted 27 months later.
I knew I had had some vaccines. I had no idea what they were, and I have 2 very large ones on my right arm and then 3 smaller ones on my left. So I always knew, just growing up, that I had more vaccines than most kids.
This group of Americans have travelled to Philadelphia from New York, New Jersey, even Alaska. All were born in Irish mother and baby homes, many at the time of the vaccine trials. Many have tried in vain to get their records from the Sisters of the Sacred Hearts, who ran 3 of the largest homes in the state. Many of those had contact with senior social worker Sister Sarto, seen here in a home video giving a tour of the Bessborough home to a former resident in 2002. Sister Sarto was adamant that they had retained good records.
That's a record. That's where we have all our records.
And that's a very, very special room. There's only 3 people allowed in there.
There's not many records anyway from the 50s.
There are?
Right, they aren't.
There are.
There are records?
If I had time, I would open that. But there are good records.
This was in sharp contrast to what many adoptees were told when they came looking for their own records at this time.
It was in 2002 when I went to meet Sister Sardo in Bessborough in Cork. And then I said I would like to have my formal health records, anything you have and everything you have. And she said she had nothing.
Sister Sardo in Bessborough told me that my file's there. She gave me information, but very, very limited. I've tried everywhere to get my file, and everyone I know, but I can't get my information. I can't get a file.
The Sisters of the Sacred Hearts told Primetime that Sister Sarto assisted those she could within the confines of legal and societal constraints. Primetime has been told that these files were being transferred from the order into HSE storage at this hospital in Cork, following the intervention of the Data Protection Commissioner. According to the HSE, this move was delayed by protracted legal negotiations over indemnity from legal actions that may arise from the release of these files. Chris and the others have been assured that they will soon get their files, but after years of waiting, they have their doubts.
Why am I scared? There must be some explanation for it. There has to be an explanation, but it just seems that I'm going from one to another and getting no answers at all.
Really upsetting, the fact that I know it's there, and they won't let me see it. I don't want to know my mother's information. I want to know my own health information, that I can go with my children. I can move forward with my children, my grandchildren.
What I'm trying to do is to let them know this is wrong. It should not have been done to you or done to me or any of these other young babies, and it won't be done again.
That the most vulnerable babies in the state were recruited in the name of medical progress is a shameful chapter in our recent history. But tonight, Primetime can reveal an even more shocking violation. The fact that hundreds of babies who died in institutions and hospitals were sent to our top medical schools for dissection without their parents' permission. In 1950, Sheila Deasy gave birth to a baby girl in St. Patrick's Mother and Baby Home on the Navan Road in Dublin. It was the young waitress's 4th child and her first girl. She named her Sally.
My mother had the most extraordinary hard life. You know, she gave birth to 4 children. 2 of them died. 1 died at 2 months. 1 died at 7 months. They were all, you know, children. All her children were taken into care. It must have been very, very hard for her. I mean, you know, my mother took an awful lot of secrets to her grave.
When her mother passed away earlier this year, Sally decided to find out more about her 2 brothers who died as babies. She quickly learned that her brother John, who died in St. Patrick's Home at the age of 2 months, was buried in the Holy Angels plot in Glasnevin Cemetery.
So I took myself off to Glasnevin Cemetery to see where he was buried, and he's buried in the Holy Angels plot. It's a kind of common grave. And as I was walking towards the grave, I started to look at the documents that Glasnevin Cemetery gave me, and I thought, born in 1947, died in 1948, and was buried in 1950, and I just thought, must be some error.
But there was no error. After further inquiries, Sally stumbled upon an unsettling secret. John Deasy's death at 2 months is entered in the Glasnevin Register as AS, or anatomical subject. It described him as an illegitimate child who had died of a now outdated term of inanition, or failure to thrive.
His body was taken to Trinity College in Dublin, and he was used for medical research and for trainee doctors to experiment on. I was really shocked. I wasn't shocked with disapproval, because it's not a question of disapproval. I was just shocked, 2 months old, you know. And I took myself off to Trinity. They took me into the kind of lab where bodies are laid on the slab, and you know, and I just kind of closed my eyes and pictured this tiny little baby.
The anatomy department in Trinity gave Sally the only record they hold relating to her brother. The stub of a receipt book which records his age, that he lived in St. Patrick's Home, and the exact time the body was delivered by the undertakers. There is no evidence that consent was either sought or obtained.
You know, one half of me was saying, well, that's absolutely necessary, we have to have this to make progress. I mean, you know, but the other half of me, like the personal side, is like, it's not just my brother, but it's my mother's baby. And I did feel really sad, I really did. I just kept thinking, what must she have gone through? But we don't even know if she knew.
Primetime has learned that John was not alone. In fact, the remains of hundreds of infants passed straight into the anatomy departments like Trinity, right up to the mid-1960s. In fact, 460 infant bodies from Dublin institutions were sent to anatomy departments over a 25-year period. Most came from St. Patrick's Mother and Baby Home and its sister hospital St. Kevin's, who sent the bodies of over 400 infants for dissection in this period. At its peak, in 1 year alone, nearly 60 infant bodies were sent to the anatomy department in UCD. Over 30 went to the Royal College of Surgeons and 27 to Trinity College, making a total of 118 remains of infants sent from institutions for dissection, and it wasn't confined to Dublin. 35 babies were sent to the University College Galway for anatomical study during the same period.
I think to me it further hits home that we were just really little more than a number. You know, we weren't worthy of a name, we weren't worthy of decent burial plots.
I think the use of any bodies of whether dead adults, dead babies, dead children for anatomical studies, for medical student training, for research purposes without consent is abhorrent, because there are so many cultural traditions about the need, about how we say goodbye to our relatives who have died, and to go on to take the body away without consent to use it for other purposes cuts across all these cultural ideas and needs.
The heads of the Irish medical schools provided the figures for this programme, but declined to be interviewed. They suggested that the bodies could have been unclaimed, as, prior to the late 1960s, a lot of the unclaimed bodies were those of infants, and as such could legally be sent for dissection. In a statement they said, "By today's standards, this practice would be unacceptable. We are aware that these findings may be distressing for the families involved." However, they said that they didn't have the expertise to comment on historical practices relating to anatomy departments. Historically, there was a shortage of bodies available for dissection, which meant that cemeteries like Glasnevin had to be guarded against grave robbing. The Anatomy Act of 1832 was introduced to put a halt to this. In practice, it legalised the dissection of the poor.
So if you died in a workhouse or a hospital or some other institution without enough money for your own funeral, you were taken for dissection.
So it seems that it is significant that the three institutions that supplied the majority of the infant remains to the colleges, St. Patrick's, St. Kevin's and the Central Hospital in Galway, were all former workhouses with a history of sending their pauper dead for dissection. What we don't know is why these practices continued for so long after the poor law system was abolished, or indeed why the infants who passed away in a mother and baby home could be classed as unclaimed.
I don't understand how the babies in the mother and baby homes could be classified as unclaimed, because the mothers were there with their children. Unless the mothers were being treated as though they were paupers and had no rights in law, I can't see how they could say the child was unclaimed.
We requested an interview with the Daughters of Charity who ran St. Patrick's. They declined,
saying that at this remove they had no knowledge or information on the anatomical studies on the bodies of deceased infants from St. Patrick's. They stressed that the sisters in St. Patrick's were at all times merely employees of the relevant health authority.
I just feel like we were there for them to do whatever they wanted to us. So if anyone had a baby and the child died, who's going to ask, where's the baby? Where is it buried? Who's going to ask? Nobody cared. Nobody cared.
By law, the medical colleges had to inform the Department of Health each time they received a body. We asked the Minister for Health and the Minister for Children to take part in this programme. Neither was available. In a joint statement they said, "The Ministers deeply regret any distress caused as a result of any outdated practices which are no longer in place or acceptable." They said they were working on a human tissue bill which will provide for a strong consent framework for the donation of bodies. Although we know the cadavers were very valuable, the medical colleges say they didn't pay the institutions for them. However, sending the bodies to medical colleges would have saved them the expense of a burial.
I think very little value was placed on the women and children in these institutions, and worse for those who died in the institutions, and their use then from anatomical research demonstrated in many cases that they're more valued in their death than in their life.
Of all the secrets and lies that still surround this dark era in Irish life, perhaps this is the darkest secret of all. In the end, our investigation raised more questions than we could answer for the generation that passed through these institutions. Their search for answers to the questions the rest of us take for granted will go on.
And if you've been affected by the issues in this prime time, stay with us for support information. If you've been affected by issues arising from this programme, you can contact the Adoption Rights Alliance on 086 126 7566. Phone lines are open now until 11:30 and Monday through Friday from 10 until 1. Or a Little Lifetime Foundation, formerly iSANS, on 01872 6996. That line will be open 24 hours a day through October 13th. The Samaritans can be reached on 1850 60 1990. And for contact information for the University Anatomy Departments, please see the Primetime website, www.rte.ie/primetime.